Okay, got it. Oh, so we're still saying we're offline just now, so say it's got this wee lag. We just need to wait for it to go online. And that's us live. Hello everyone, and welcome to Aberlour Children's Charities Challenge Poverty Week Twitch special. Today I'm joined by our CEO, SallyAnn, and our Head of Policy and Participation, Martin. So thank you both for joining us today.
Hi, Corin. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Corin.
So for anyone watching and is new to Aberlour, we are a children's charity and we support children and their families all across Scotland. We are committed to fighting poverty and discrimination, and we know that not every child is born with an equal chance, but we are there to help families before they reach crisis point, before damage is done, before it's too late. And that's why Challenge Poverty Week is such an important week for us to help raise awareness of those issues that families are facing and the help that's needed to support them. So Martin, can you kick us off by explaining what Challenge Poverty Week is?
So Challenge Poverty Week is an opportunity to really shine a spotlight on the issue of poverty across Scotland, to really raise awareness of the extent of poverty for children, for families, for individuals right across the country, to tell the stories about what poverty is and what it means for families and communities. But it's also an opportunity for people right across civil society, for organisations and campaigners, activists, children's charities like our own, like Aberlour, who want to see an end to poverty, to come together and to really focus on what we can do about poverty in Scotland, the solutions and the ways in which we can address poverty, to tackle and challenge poverty and hopefully eradicate poverty, I suppose, is the ultimate ambition. So it's once same time of year, every year, at the beginning of October. I think it's been going for about 10 years. It's organised by the Poverty Alliance, which is an anti-poverty organisation, but really it includes people from all walks of life and organisations from right across Scotland who get involved, really who all have the common goal and shared interest of doing everything we can to alleviate, to tackle and to ultimately end poverty in Scotland.
Brilliant, thank you, Martin. And if anyone watching has any questions for SallyAnn and Martin, then please pop them into the chat bar and we'll get through as many as we can during this session. So SallyAnn, a lot of people watching this might actually be asking, what is poverty today? Can you explain what it is?
So at a very basic level, poverty is about not having enough of the basic necessities that we need on a day-to-day basis to live a decent life. So it's not having enough money in your pocket to be able to pay your bills in terms of your rent, your council tax. It's about struggling to make ends meet in terms of providing food for families. People living in poverty will often have very limited opportunities to get involved in some social experiences that you and I might take for granted, Corin. So for example, going to the cinema is just beyond what people actually are able to do with the income that they've got. There's quite complicated sums that are done by economists and anti-poverty campaigners around poverty levels, which I'm not going to go into, but it is about living in a situation whereby your day-to-day opportunities are restricted to the point where it can have a detrimental impact on your health and well-being because of the level of your income.
Yeah. So how many children are living in poverty at the moment in Scotland, SallyAnn?
In Scotland just now, we have 1 in 4 children living in households are deemed to be in poverty. What's a really interesting statistic and might actually surprise some of the folk who are watching is that around 70% of those children live in working households, so they have someone in their household who works. So the kind of the stereotype that is sometimes presented by the media of people living in poverty as folk who don't want to work and who want to live off benefits is simply not true. What we see is increasingly people who living in poverty are in working households but who have got low earnings because of the kind of work that they're having to rely on. They may be people that are affected by disability who can't work, and because of their disabilities they rely on benefits, but they are often living in poverty because their income levels are not sufficient to meet the needs of them and their families. So I suppose one of the things that I think we would want to do today is just bust that myth that poverty is something that people bring upon themselves. It is absolutely not something that people bring upon themselves.
Yeah. So Martin, sorry, Martin, carry on.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add just a little bit to what SallyAnn was saying there as well, and just thinking about the statistics. I think 1 in 4, which is the best statistic we've got at the minute, for very technical reasons I won't go into. There hasn't been official statistics produced in Scotland for a couple of years now, partly to do with COVID. But those statistics, the statistics that we do have tell us that there's slightly more than 1 in 4 children right across Scotland living in poverty. To put that into numbers, that's around slightly more than 250,000 children right across the country. But what's really important to understand, I suppose, is that that's the average for the whole country. When we begin to look at particular parts of the country and particular areas, that number can really increase significantly. For example, in parts of Glasgow, where there's significant levels of poverty and deprivation historically, that can jump to nearly as much as 1 in 2 children living in poverty. So there are communities across Scotland in certain parts of the country, largely in our bigger urban areas and cities, that are really, really affected and blighted by poverty. And so it's really important to understand that poverty is pervasive, it's stark, but it really does hit and affect particular communities and areas in Scotland much more than it does others.
Yeah, that's really shocking, isn't it?
Sorry, Corn, I was just going to build on what Martin said. I mean, one of the kind of areas that we want to focus on is obviously we're a campaigning charity in part, and we want to kind of fight poverty. And we come from the perspective that there is something fundamental that can be done to reduce poverty in the UK. As one of the richest economies in the world, we have a moral responsibility to look after all of our citizens because we can. So certainly what we would want to do as a charity is keep the poverty issues that we experience from parents on a day-to-day basis really high up on the agenda, to make sure that people really and truly understand that this is, as Martin says, this is a real pernicious problem that we have with how our society is organised, if you like. But if we had the political will, we could fundamentally do something about this. And when you look at the impact of poverty on children and folk who are living on a chronic basis, we know that those who live in poverty are much more likely to have poor outcomes for health, so they're more likely to become seriously ill earlier in their life. We know they're more likely to have poorer educational outcomes, so they're less likely to do well at school than others. We know that they have fewer opportunities in terms of social interaction, so the strengths of their relationships can be affected as well. Now, that is about having a lack of opportunity. It is not about having a lack of ambition or a lack of will to do well in life. So part of what we also need to accept is that as a state, as a country, we have a duty to all of our citizens. And one of the concerns I have is that even today, I was listening to conversations on the radio where the government is silent now at a UK level about whether or not they are going to protect benefits and increase them with inflation. Now, let's be really clear. If we have a government who does not increase benefits with the rate of inflation, the poorest members of our society will have a real-time cut in their income at the same time as experiencing higher fuel bills, higher costs for food, higher costs for travel. And that actually begins to bring into question, I think, our moral responsibilities to our citizens and how we protect those that are the least well off.
Yeah. So, I mean, the cost of living is affecting all of us right now. All of us are touched by it in some way. Can you explain, SallyAnn, what our families are feeling right now, what their worries and their fears for the families we support?
So, yeah, we are all affected by it, but we're not all affected by it to the same degree. So one of the things I would say is that a lot of the families that we work with were already living in poverty. So they were already in a disadvantaged position before the price hike came around in terms of energy costs, etc. So they had nowhere to go with increased bills because they didn't have any kind of spare cash in their households. So what families are telling us, and we often hear people talking about people making the decision between heating and eating. Our families have gone beyond that because they're faced with impossible choices because they simply don't have enough money to feed themselves adequately and heat their houses adequately. And what we see, just a couple of weeks ago, statistics came out around increased numbers of people with malnutrition being hospitalised in the UK, including children. I think we need to be really seriously concerned about that as a country. So what our families are telling us, and we have an urgent assistance fund where we give direct cash payments to families who are in urgent need. And we have folk coming to us from all over Scotland. The fund is exhausted at the moment. We've spent all of the money that we had in it. But what people are telling us, they come with desperate situations where they don't have enough food to feed the kids. They have issues in relation to rent arrears. They may have issues in relation to council tax arrears. And so what we see is families who are in a perpetual state of destitution because just in order to pay their bills, it leaves them well under the poverty line and they simply don't have enough to basically make ends meet on a week-to-week basis. And one of the things that we've spoken to families about is how we support them with some of the debts that they have to public agencies. So like their rent arrears, like loans that they need to pay back to the Department of Work and Pensions, like council tax arrears. And I suppose what we're calling for, especially at a time like this where you have, double and triple whammies hitting families in terms of increases in costs and bills, is could we think differently about how we support our poorest families who are struggling on a week-to-week basis with debt? We campaigned earlier on this year around school meal debt, and we're beginning to see some progress where councils are writing off school debt for individual families. And the importance of that is that what we know is if you live in poverty and you have poor relationships with those in your family, you're more likely to become unhealthy, you're more likely to lose out in education. And what we know is that stress really impacts on relationships. So if parents are living in a perpetual state of stress because of the debt that they're in, then that will potentially have a direct impact on the quality of the relationships that they have with their children. So what we're saying is, could we just stop, pause, think about how we can help these families to reduce that stress? And a lot of the times when we talk to families, they tell us that stress comes from what they find is an impossible situation in terms of how they try to manage their money on a week-to-week basis.
So if I can just come in there as well, SallyAnn, I think SallyAnn speaks to a really important point there about the impact of poverty on mental health and well-being. But just to refer back to the cost of living crisis, as we've come accustomed to referring it, Corin, what we're experiencing, and I mean the population as a whole in Scotland and the UK now is a cost of living crisis. I think what's really important to recognise is that for the families that Aberlour works with, for low-income families across Scotland and across the UK, they've been living through a cost of living crisis for many, many years as a result of ongoing and relentless austerity policies that have impacted people on the lowest incomes, as a result of the dismantling of the social security safety net as we've known it, due to the policies of successive UK governments. And so what this really is, this is a cost of living catastrophe for the families that we work with, that Aberlour works with right across Scotland, for families on the lowest incomes. And families are frightened. They're really frightened. They're on their knees and they don't really know where to turn. They don't know how they're going to be able to absorb any more costs as bills soar, as energy prices spike, as everything else becomes more expensive and more unaffordable, families just don't know how they're going to cover those costs and pay those bills. And what we know about poverty is the impact and effect it then does have on people's mental health and well-being, as SallyAnn has already spoken about. The traumatic effects of poverty, of relentless poverty and persistent poverty for families who are growing up in those circumstances. And if we want to make sure we are providing or making Scotland a country, so-called the best country in the world to grow up in, as the Scottish Government says its ambition is, we need to make sure we're doing everything to tackle and to end poverty and to prevent children growing up in those circumstances and experiencing that deep level of anxiety and potential trauma as a result of everything that's happening in their lives that's fueled by and driven by the poverty and the disadvantage they experience.
Now, Martin, SallyAnn briefly mentioned our campaigning work. Can you give everyone a bit of detail on what we've been campaigning for recently and what we're asking the government and other bodies to do to support families?
So yeah, SallyAnn's already talked a little bit there about the debt work that we've been doing. And I think one of the things that's important just to understand where Aberlour has come to in relation to debt specifically, debt to public bodies specifically, and what that means for families that we work with, is the pattern that we've been able to identify through the families that we've supported through Aberlour's Urgent Assistance Fund. And one of the really concerning things that has come across strongly through what we know about family circumstances is the sheer number of families who are being impacted and affected by debt, who are often trapped or locked in poverty, or are an even greater disadvantage in terms of being able to lift themselves out of poverty as a result of debt that they owe. And so we wanted to understand this a little bit better. We wanted to understand what the circumstances were, what the issues were, and what, most importantly, the solutions were for how we can help alleviate and address that for families. So we've had a piece of research that's been going on, being led by an academic called Professor Morag Traynor, who's a leading expert on issues of poverty and inequality. And working alongside Morag, we've been able to identify a really concerning picture of the scale and the level of debt to public bodies for low-income families right across Scotland. This is an ongoing piece of work, and over the next couple of months, we'll be publishing more data and more information and being able to say a little bit more about the wider issue of debt. But one of the very first things over the end of last year and beginning of this year that we've been able to identify was the scale of school meal debt for low-income families in Scotland. And first and foremost, I think it's appalling that school meal debt is even a thing. I think the concept of school meal debt should shame us as a country, but nonetheless, it exists, and it exists at quite significant levels. Just to be clear for people who might be watching this, school meal for families in Scotland who are not eligible for free school meals but are on low incomes, because the eligibility thresholds, the amount of money that families need to earn in order to qualify for free school meals is really low. So there's a significant number of families in Scotland who are on very low incomes, but still earning more than free school meal eligibility allows for them to be able to claim free school meals. So within that population of families right across Scotland, we are seeing really high levels of families who don't qualify for free school meals, but whose children are coming to school hungry, without a meal, or in some cases, being provided with a meal by the school, but their family are then accruing and accumulating debt as a result. Tens of thousands of children across Scotland are in this situation. And what that points to, actually, because of the way in which school meals are managed in high schools predominantly in Scotland, through automated systems, it looks like it seems to be the case that actually alongside that, in parallel to that issue of school meal debt for families, there's also an issue of hidden school hunger for children, particularly in high schools. So this has been quite shocking for us. We think this has been a hidden issue. So we've been campaigning to raise awareness of this. We have given evidence at Parliament. We've lobbied the Scottish Government and local authorities. We've done some very, very focused campaigning work to try and, first of all, raise this as an issue and try and get some action, try and get local authorities and the Scottish Government to act to tackle this. And one of the things we've been successful in doing so far is a number of local authorities at a local authority level have taken the decision and taken steps to actually write that debt off. right now in the current climate, in terms of cost of living, it's one small thing that I suppose local authorities can do. So we applaud and really acknowledge and recognising the local authorities are taking those steps. But there's many more local authorities that have yet not decided or not yet taken the position to do that. And at the same time, that's not to say that there isn't something the Scottish Government could still do. So this has been an area that's really, really significant. It's something that we are continuing to make calls on and calls about in relation to getting more local authorities and the Scottish Government to work together and to write that relatively small amount of debt in terms of the grand scheme of things for families across Scotland. But I think it's also an important step to recognising that it's one way in which we can do things slightly differently in terms of how we support families. And it might let us think and help us think differently about other types of debt, particularly debt to public bodies that families might have. So that's the piece of work that we've been doing so far. It's still some work to do around that. But in the broader area of debt to public bodies, for anyone that's been following Aberlour's work or has been reading any of our research, there's more of that to come. This is going to be an area that we're going to continue focusing on because it's necessary and because it's a real significant issue for families right across Scotland.
Yeah, it's really unbelievable when you hear those stats. It seems something quite simple that could make a big difference to families. So SallyAnn, what else needs to be done to help families that are either in poverty just now or to stop families falling into poverty?
So I think there's a whole range of things that government can do to intervene to improve things, Corn, and I'll only cover a few of those. But one of the things that I think certainly that I've become really quite thoughtful about following the work that we did on school meal debt is really taking us to a place, especially in the current climate, where more and more families are going to experiencing debt to public bodies because they can't pay their rent or they can't pay their council tax. I think we need a different approach to how we actually address that debt. So I would urge the public sector and the Scottish Government to engage in a conversation about how that debt will be managed over a period of time for the average person in Scotland that is going to be incredibly difficult for them to be able to keep up with the payments that are going to be demanded of them. I suppose what the school meal debt showed us was that there are mechanisms that can be used to write off debt in specific circumstances. Now, I'm obviously not going to sit here and say every piece of public debt to public agencies from the lowest income families should be written off. But what I am saying is, can we act with compassion? Can we act with empathy at a time where people are really trying their best to make ends meet? They're not deliberately not paying council tax or not paying rent, and by the most part. These are people that are under real pressure. So can we have a different kind of conversation about that? And let's not have the conversation just because people who would usually be able to pay their council tax and usually be able to pay their rent suddenly can't. That conversation needs to be inclusive, and it needs to include all of the folk on low income in terms of how we actually manage that, and how we make sure that people at the same time that they're worrying about putting food on the table don't have to worry about the threat of eviction or the threat of sheriff officers coming to their houses because they owe amounts to the council or to the DWP. So that's something that I think we need to invite in our country as a bigger conversation about how we manage that. I think there are also things that we can look at in terms of the benefit system. And to be fair to the Scottish Government has introduced the Scottish Child Payment, and they are going to increase that and they are going to roll that out further. But I think if we have got any chance of meeting child poverty targets that we're trying to reach, then we need to again review the Scottish Child Payment and look at increasing it again, so that we can actually lift more children out of poverty in Scotland. At the moment, that's going up to £25 per child per week. Some estimations suggest it should be as much as £40 per child per week. That would make a real difference to children and families. And I suppose the other thing that I would say is that a lot of our responses to people on low incomes seem to be about us making decisions for families about what they can receive or get if they're living on low income. So I think what we also need to look at is how we actually look at the public service system, if you like, for want of a better way of describing it, but those bits of the system that can support families, like the Scottish Welfare Fund, like the provision of work of support through social work, and how we can actually provide cash to families to enable them to make their own decisions about what their greatest need is. One of the things that we've learned in Aberlour is that if we work alongside families, they're the experts in their own lives. They are the people that can make the best decisions on a day-to-day basis about how they use their money. People like me actually are very far removed from it, because I live in a situation where I've got a good income and I don't need to worry about the bills and how I keep the lights on. So how dare I pretend that I can go into a family who are living in really low incomes and come in with suggestions that I might make about how they can improve their lives? I'm much more interested in speaking to families about what their views are. And what families tell us is, if you give me the money, I can make good decisions. And all of the evidence that's been done on this suggests that that is indeed the case. So another myth that's out there is that you can't trust the poor with money. Nonsense. The people that squander money in our society are not those with the lowest of incomes.
Just to add to that, and I'm going to just echo everything that SallyAnn said there, but just on a myth-busting spree as we appear to be, one of the other things that's really important to recognise and to understand is that people on the lowest incomes, that we find from the work we've done with families directly every day, but also that is borne out by the endless amounts of research that's done around this, is that people on the lowest incomes are most often the best money managers and accountants you will ever find.
Yep.
They understand and know where every penny that comes in, where it goes, and they most often make the best decisions about where that money goes for their own family's well-being. They don't squander it, and they don't fritter it away. They don't buy it on booze and fags and unnecessary things. For most families, in most circumstances, when they're on the lowest incomes, they use that money wisely and in the best interests of them and their children. And we see the evidence of that every single day.
Yeah, definitely. Whenever I get to speak to our families, they really amaze me all the time. So, Martin, anyone watching this that maybe doesn't work for the government or in a council, what could they do to help families that are living in poverty? It could even be someone next door to them. What can they do to help? So,
for people who just want to help and support in whatever way they can, I mean, there's plenty of things that people can do. Anyone that wants to support Aberlour and the work that we do, or organisations like Aberlour, we've mentioned things like our Urgent Assistance Fund, where we give direct financial assistance. So either by donating to help and support that work, that's a direct way that they know that by giving money, that money that they give and donate will go directly to families themselves. And as SallyAnn said, allow families to spend that money on the things that they know will work for them and for their families. We, as a campaigning and a fundraising organisation as well, we do a lot of activities over the course of any given year. People can volunteer their time to help us with our fundraising activities and to raise money on our behalf, and that will always also go towards helping us to provide things like Aberlour's Urgent Assistance Fund, as well as other essential services and supports to help and support families. They can campaign and support our campaigning work, sign up to petitions, letters to their MSPs or their MPs or elected representatives to draw attention and to highlight and to create awareness, not just the work that Aberlour are doing, but the issues of poverty right across Scotland, and to demand and call for change. And in fact, probably right now, the need is even greater than it's ever been to have people out there, people out in the streets, people calling for action and calling for change. And if people are keen to do that on behalf of Aberlour and the families that we work with, and to see positive change in government do things differently and do things better, then I would encourage them to think about doing that as well.
Well, I would say, Corin, I know we've mentioned the Urgent Assistance Fund, and that's a really important lifeline for families. And as we go into winter, it's going to be a really grim winter for some families. So we know that over the last 2 years, we've paid out in excess of £2 million through that fund. And that is usually in the shape of cash to families for a whole range of things. But the kind of top asks are for money for the electric or gas meters, food, clothing for the kids, and beds. So the fastest way of, if people are motivated to help families, and they want to be guaranteed of making sure their money gets directly to families, is a donation to the Urgent Assistance Fund. We guarantee that any individual donation that comes into Aberlour Urgent Assistance Fund, 100% of that donation will go to the family directly. Aberlour don't take a fee off that money, so it's a straight transaction. If people give us money, we take all of that money and we give it directly to families. So I think that's a really important thing to say, because sometimes people get a wee bit concerned that if they're giving money to charity, that a big bit of it's top sliced for administration. And we are very clear that donations from the public do not have an administration fee. We give it straight 100% to families.
Yeah, and I guess like you said earlier on, just now that fund's actually closed just now because we don't have any funds to give out to families. So it really is in a desperate need of help, because the families do need it and they're still asking for the help. But
yeah, and we're hoping to reopen in the next few weeks. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, SallyAnn and Martin. I think we could be talking for hours and hours about this subject, because it's so important and there's so much work needs to be done to help end child poverty. So we're not, I hope in the future we aren't sitting having this conversation ever again. So we're going to be taking a 2-week break from our live streams. We're going to be back on Wednesday, the 26th of October at 3:30 with my colleague Alan, and he works in our Scottish Guardianship Service and our Befriending Young Refugees project. So I hope that you'll all join us then and speak to Alan. So thank you so much, everybody. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.